All right, this episode of a Hero's Journey podcast is brought to you by S&P Inc., which has been a very good friend to me and Chase.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's changed my life. Actually, gave me the confidence back that it was the thing I was known for. I was known for my hair, and now things are a little different these days. Don't laugh. My boy over here is my guest. He's laughing at me. JPS Computers. I want to thank Alex and Jesse. Jesse, dude, thank you so much. If you have needs, you want websites built, you want to gain followers, those kinds of things, they can help you grow your company. JPS Computers out of Oregon. Chase, this is this is a very, very special episode of a Hero's Journey podcast. When I created this, I remember standing in my kitchen, and I had a roommate. He's a pilot, very well read, my boy Boone. And I said to him, one day, I want a podcast, but I don't know what it would be, except for I know how I am and the kind of advice that I give my kids, the people that I love around me, or the way that I try and live. And I was sitting there sipping on some coffee, talking to him, and I went, Hero's Journey. That's what it would be. It would have to be a Hero's Journey podcast. And he looked at me and it was like a light bulb went off, and he's like, that's it. He's like, do you know that's Joseph Campbell wrote a book, and he starts breaking it down, and before you know it, he's sending me YouTube clips of things like Star Wars and all these things and how movies are broke down, and Joseph Campbell, like highlights of all these things. And he goes, do you know what Hero's Journey is? And I'm like, I have no clue. I just know that a hero's journey itself is something that the way that I try and live my life. I get up every morning and I want to be the hero of my own story.
I remember that episode that Brian Boone came on.
Yeah.
He sent me like 40 Hero's Journey charts and graphs to toss up there and there.
Yeah, oh, dude. Yes, he did. That episode had more work done to it than anything. Like there were pie charts when he talked about things, whatever. But he educated me, on this whole thing. And for me, it was just a feeling. I'm a songwriter, so it was one of those things where that's the way I was feeling when we were talking about it, right? So my today's guest, and for the next 2 weeks, today and next week, we're going to break this up. I know that we have a lot to talk about. We're running out of time, and I'm wasting it just talking to you guys. But my boy is like a brother to me, and I had to sit on my back porch last night and remind him that you are family. There's a difference between people you choose that are your friends, and then there's the people you consider that are family. Yep. And it's true, because he is. I think about who I am as an adult, who knocked me into making sure that I stayed humble, the things that lifted me up when I needed to be lifted up. That's what a big brother does. And I want to introduce you guys to my big brother. And I love you, dude, Mr. Scott Hartmann. What's up, man?
What's up, yo?
How you doing?
I'm doing excellent, actually.
Good.
Doing really good. I'm excited. This is fun. I appreciate you inviting me on and giving me the opportunity to talk. And honestly, to me, this is more about other people get to see how conversations go with us.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You're right.
Because, I was just mentioning to Chase, having met the fine opera singer, that for us, I think the funniest thing would be is if we got in here and sat here quietly or
and didn't say anything.
Not like, because that would be the total contrast. Like, we talked I got here at 5:00 yesterday, drove in, and we talked till 2 a.m.
Literally nonstop.
Yeah, and it wasn't like anything else was going on. That's what it was. Everything we were doing was to support the conversation and to reinforce and to catch up and and all those things. It's so familial, and it's just grounded in all the time that we've been together and those experiences that those extraordinary relationships that are frankly rare as you get older too, of the people that you have all those experiences with and that emotional connection with. And, and here's one of the things I've always appreciated, about the Hopkins family and you and our friendship has always been that we don't need to tell each other that we love each other
Right.
and we got your back and all that. But we always are telling
Always
each other.
do.
Yeah, we're always making sure.
Yeah.
That takes us back to, remember when Robert Cutting passed away?
Yes.
When we were kids.
Oh,
And that was a big turning point for us as a group, because we all went from sort of puffy chested kids to, hey, I'm giving you a hug before, I don't know if I'm gonna see you again, I love you, man. And it was a really interesting point for us as a group, as all of our friends,
Yeah.
that was where, and particularly for you, it became such a defining thing where you,
it did resonate with me.
I'm giving hugs, man. I love you. And it was amazing to see that. Now, this is a million years ago, but like that's always been part of the dynamic amongst the family, as it were, and the rest of it.
Somebody young had passed
Yes.
that we knew, that
Yeah.
we worked. We
Yeah.
all worked. We worked at a club together. We grew up. Chase. We worked at a club. I was 16, and I get a job at a dance club on ladies' night during the summer on a Wednesday, and I end up meeting two of the guys that we talk about, Dan and Chris. Met there,
Yeah.
and Chris was a wrestler, and Dan, became this, fireman, and all. It's crazy. But as kids, that's where we all I already knew you,
Yeah.
and I brought you in
Yep.
to the fold
Yep.
and got you a job there when
Yeah.
we had a job, and we're a family. All of us are.
I broke
we're
the seal
so tight.
there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but
No, you're fine.
that's funny because I always joke that I broke the seal because everybody who worked there were super attractive dudes wearing the bow ties, and part of what brought all the young girls into the club and the rest of it. But they needed somebody who could work the door, and so I rolled in, and I'm like, okay, I'll be here. I'm one of these guys now. Yeah, all right, cool.
Dude. How tall are you?
I'm 6'4". Yeah.
6'4". At that time, you're like
300 pounds. So,
and just hammer thrower,
Yeah.
all
I
American.
was an athlete.
All-American
I could
hammer
dunk
thrower.
a shot put. I was always proud of that I could dunk a shot put. For being 300 pounds, be able to one hand dunk a shot put felt pretty impressive to me. Like stuff I can't do now. It's sort of fantasy stuff. I remember, that was neat. But definitely a formidable person at that time for sure.
Oh, definitely.
In the early days, it was so that was such. And it's so strange because it's so present, but that was where everything was just, I don't know, the beginning of the universe in many ways.
Yeah.
All these relationships and people that we have such affection for, and wonderful stories and experiences that are all part of what shaped us into who we are now. Because as much as we loved each other then, we're substantially better people now because of all those things, and because of each other,
Yep.
and the good and bad that came with that, and and all the rest of it. So I fondly think about those days.
I do, and I'm thinking about something right now. I don't know why it's coming to mind, but
Go ahead, man.
but talking about the dance club and how we, talking about this, we'll probably get thrown in jail.
I thought about this story, and I was like, I'm not going to say that.
You're not going to say it, yeah.
Even though it's well after the statute of limitations.
Yeah, but
nobody's coming after us.
But we're like teenagers, and some guy goes and smacks the girl who takes the money, and the owner goes, "Bring him to me." And it was like out of a movie, dude. And we drove through town, and we're before cell phones, before any of that stuff. And I don't know how we got the word out. Next thing you know, we're like walking through a house party and dragging a guy from his sink where his friends are not stopping us, and throwing him in a car and driving him to the owner of the club. Oh, we could go to jail now.
Hold on a second. Let's be clear. A,
we never touched
do that.
Yeah.
B, he hit a woman who was a friend of ours and a coworker.
Yes.
And in our mind, there's just one thing: we're going to go get this guy. And we're going to bring him back, and he will face the music. And so when we, it's funny because I remember you hit the door, and everyone sort of stared at you, and you're like, hey, and you pointed at him because he's sitting at the table across in the room. And then I hit the door, and everybody parted the seas, and you walked through.
And I grabbed him.
But, and then we listen,
nothing happened to him.
Took back, and, and it was just a verbal, hey,
yes,
man,
you can't do this.
Don't do this.
We'll turn you into the police.
Yeah. And, and he was fine. Yeah.
We'll leave that story right there.
That's as far as, you want to tell it.
He wasn't floating down the river or anything like that.
No. But, listen, the intention wasn't to hurt him.
No.
None of that was our thought. It was about protecting family. It was about protecting people who were around,
Pam.
Yeah, 100%.
That was Pam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I tell that story, but then, it's amongst many of the stories that I would tell in my youth, and either say, I don't know why I did this.
Exactly.
Or B, like, don't do this, but without those experiences, sometimes you don't necessarily know to look back on it and go, I could have done it differently.
Yeah, could have handled this in a different way.
Though I would say we were upset enough that he'd hurt somebody that we cared about, and again, this was pre-cell phones and the rest of it and stuff. And one of the caveat to it is that when we went to find him, we found him because of how many people we knew.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
we knew that social network was long before Facebook or AOL for that matter.
Yeah. Exactly. It was crazy, and we grew up together in Salem, Oregon. That's where we're from. Yeah. We grew up in Salem. Here's the crazy journey that we'll get to here, because we grew up together, and there's a group of us. There's Dan, Chris, my brother Cody, you. That's the tight knit. You had Blaine, you have Brian, my cousin Brian, who came in, Brian Wiggs, Kent Emery. Yeah. These were that came in later into the fold.
Yeah.
And that was like our little group.
Yeah.
And we were all a brotherhood.
Yeah.
And it stayed like that. So we all grow up and go our separate ways. And I remember I pick up and I move to California.
Yeah.
And the day that I moved to California, and then Dan and Cody follow, is the day that I had to get an apartment, because I was living in a parking lot at Gold's Gym, where you know very well, because we used to work out there.
Yep.
But how did you, because you started to share this, and I said, I want to know, like, what was the turning point? Salem, Oregon. You ended up in Salem, because now what you guys don't know about Scott, I have my buddy Scott Hartmann on. Scott teaches at the New York Film Academy. You teach film. You teach how to take an idea from nothing, and creating it all the way to a finished product. But we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But how did...
It's a little foreshadowing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a Salem guy. I grew up there, and frankly, I thought I don't know. I just didn't see an outside opportunity beyond. Let's take it all the way back. I started doing theater in like the second grade.
Right.
I started doing musical theater, so I was doing 1 or 2 plays a year. Which is ironic, because when you look at me, you go, "Oh, theater actor." And I loved it. And frankly, I was pretty good at it. And then, finished it with high school. And I know I said this to you because that was my thinking at the time, is that I don't look like Tom Cruise or Mel Gibson. Like, my acting is over. It's done, so like I sort of put it aside, and I started working at the School for the Deaf. And then I watched McCoy go down and started getting into acting. We were on a wrestling team together, and now he's acting. He never acted before. And I was like, wait a second.
He was on a TV show, The Guys Next Door. Yeah. His own show.
Yeah, exactly. And he's having success, and he's so ambitious, and he's going after it and working hard. And I just couldn't reconcile that too. It felt confusing, because I actually, as a senior award, I got a bunch of senior awards, funny enough that I like that means anything, but one of them, my point being, is that one of them was most likely to become an actor.
Right.
And one of the funniest things about when I got that was, most people knew me as a thrower, and as a loud, big guy in school. A lot of people didn't see this 6'4", 275 guy, senior in high school, as being an actor.
Right.
They couldn't see that. So I'd done all that. I'd been acting for my entire life, essentially. And I watched Chris go down, and then I watch you roll down, and I'm like, man, but I still am like, but yeah, that world's not for me. I don't look pretty enough. And that's the way I thought about it. Right. And the way I understood it anyway. And so, I went to work for the Oregon School for the Deaf. started learning sign language. You know, it was a state job, and Salem is really about state jobs, right? Because
It is. My
the
sister
prison
has them,
is there. You know, the mental health stuff is right there in Salem. And, you know, School for the Deaf is there. All that, you know, all government jobs, and you know, and to me, there's two images that stick in my head that help me sort of transition, because I started to get antsy. You know, at this point I had gone to college. It was on scholarship. I was paid to throw the hammer. I was in track and field, and I was pretty good at that. But I was a terrible student. And to illustrate that, let me tell you, this is my favorite way to explain how bad a student I was, Chase, is that I remember drinking beer with my friends, like on a Friday. You remember that little like guest house place that I had way back?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. You know, and I remember drinking beer with friends on a Friday afternoon. I had this minor panic attack, and I went, oh crap. And everybody's like, what's going on? I go, oh man, I forgot to go to class. and they said to me, oh, you forgot to go to class today? And I go, no, this week.
Oh,
And
dude.
then, like, I got to Friday, and so that illustrates how good a student I was. Not.
But you were so good. You got me through college. Right. You know, my first year.
Oh, no. I still remember it because I wrote a paper for you.
You did.
When you were a clackamus that was about colonial and puritanical influence in colonial America.
Exactly.
So,
no, and
you know,
dude, like,
I still think you got a B or something, like nothing great on it. But like I was like, I can do that.
Exactly.
But I wouldn't do my own work. I wouldn't go to class, but I wanted to be an athlete. That's what I was there for.
Right.
I had no clear direction in terms of where I was trying to go, what I want to do. It was kind of an extension of high school in some ways. And I loved throwing the hammer, and that was, you know, wonderful. I trained with Olympian. I was thrown with Olympians, you know, and it was extraordinary. No coach. It was just a throwing partner, but I learned a ton from him. And then, you know,
his name again?
John McCardle.
There you go.
You know?
I remember him.
Yeah. So
because I went to Chemeketa, and you were there throwing. I went there just for a couple months. Before moving to California. But go ahead.
Yeah. So you know, and then I went off, and I went to Southern Oregon University and went to nationals. I got third, you know, in the hammer. I was an All-American, and my coach sat me down and said, you have the ability to be a champion, but you don't have the attitude. And I went, F you, I'm leaving. And I dropped out,
wow.
you know, but look, I was a terrible student. I was, you know,
right.
And I knew that. But I didn't have clarity. I didn't have that vision of where I was trying to go or what I wanted to do. And frankly, some of the discipline wasn't there. And so, you know, I dropped out of college, you know, and tried to find myself, you know.
Right.
And I remember the first year or so out of college that, you know, it was almost an odd point of pride, you know, and ignorance of youth, I suppose. But, you know, I can't tell you how many jobs, you know, at that time where I ended up at the end of the year with a stack of W-2s. That's how many jobs I had and lost. And as I was sort of figuring,
right.
And at this point you'd gone. And so, you know, I'm working at the school, I'm gaining weight,
right.
You know, and, you know, now I'm paying into retirement through the state. I'm 24, 25 years old or something. And all I'm seeing is like, you know, retirement and death. Like that's all I'm seeing, but I don't see the in-between part. In the context of Hero's Journey, that's the story.
Right.
That's where everything really happens, is in the journey. And all I was seeing was an end to it. And I had this vision of myself sitting on a brown vinyl recliner, overstuffed with like that one strip of silver tape up in the corner.
Yeah.
Right. I'm 400 pounds and I'm flipping the remote control and going, I could have done that.
Right.
You know, and I that bothered me. That profoundly bothered me. And that was part of what, you know, got me to throw all my crap into the truck and come to LA. And for me, it became, you know, this was all going into the darkness. I didn't know where I was going to.
Right.
And I arrived at LA on a Friday night. I'll never forget this. It was a very poignant moment for me because, you know, LA traffic is insane. A Friday night on the 101.
Oh, it's nothing like Salem, dude.
Oh, man.
It's a little freaky, huh?
And I only been to LA for nationals. And so now I'm on this freeway, not really clear. And this is all pre, you know, Google Maps. So
right.
I'm like, oh, where am I going? And I realized the traffic was just flying past me.
Yep.
You know, I'm like in the middle lane. There's 5 lanes. They're all just moving past me. And I'm like,
if it's late at night, there's space on the freeway, which was crazy. And that's what's spooky about it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But for me, that moment really hit me because I had to have a conversation with myself, which is, because I started freaking out and getting really concerned. And I was like, man, you're in LA. You have an option, dude. Either you need to turn your ass around or you need to hit the gas pedal. And I had made a conscious choice. And right now, I would say it was right around, Woodland or something like that. And I just went, boom, hit my gas pedal. And now I find that I'm sort of in the groove with the rest of traffic. And that was a big, no, I'm committed to do this, right? And so came to LA and, in my mind, here's an opportunity to maybe get into acting and, pursue that, without really even know the direction of it and how to approach that. I mean, you have no idea when you get here necessarily what to do. And, so, and open to the adventure of it too, because I knew I just made a pretty substantial life choice to go away from a paradigm where, people were sort of busting my chops, friends and family were like, man, what are you doing? You've got retirement going, you got a state job, you're, why would you give that up to go be an actor,
Right.
And it was confusing to them. And here's the irony of that judgment of that is those are often the same people who are like, man, you're so lucky.
Yeah.
It's like, but I had to, this was all for me. I had to figure out, where I was going, and I knew I wasn't there. So I had to be active about moving forward and trying stuff and, kind of getting over my own fear of what was in front of me and what I could do. So I was in LA.
There you were. So, and it throws me back to, you moved in with me.
Yeah.
And it was you, me, and
that was a
Christian,
huge thing, man.
Christian Martin, right?
Yeah, that's a big moment that probably rooted me in being able to stick around because where I was trying to figure out where I could stay and I was staying with Marcello and Cody and that wasn't working out. And you went, hey dude. And I was like, man, and also to contextualize it, listen, this is something we talked about a little bit last night too. It was at that point in my life, end of a long relationship, depression was certainly a part of who I was. I think there was an uncomfortable cynicism about how I thought about things. And it's embarrassing. I said it last night, but I'm willing to say it because this was one of the lessons I picked up is I said it out loud. I'm going to let Brian go down there and make it because I believed in you. I always believed in
Thanks.
you. And, didn't know what it was going to be. Certainly never predicted music, for example.
Right.
But, and I said, and it's fucking embarrassing. I'm sorry. Can I swear?
You can swear.
Sure, okay, good. I'm a swearer, so that's going to be.
Can I swear?
But I'm telling you, it was
Chase, it's a dollar in the jar.
Listen, let me just give you my credit card now. Let me just say. But it truly, and I think it's right to say this. It's fucking embarrassing for me to say this, but I was like, I'm going to ride Brian's coattails. And, he's going to do it. And
No pressure on Brian.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't about you.
I know, but I'm just saying,
just going to do it, And it was such arrogant and entitled. And it's embarrassing that I thought that way. And I even said it out loud. But what's good about it is that I'm embarrassed by it now because
Right.
I don't think that way.
No, you don't.
Certainly realize that that's not the right approach to success. It's not what I teach or how I talk to other people or mentor people in terms of trying to go out and be successful with things. And, and so I had to learn the lessons along the way to be able to reflect on that in a way that made me go, oh, that's awful. That's wrong. That's silly, and, so yeah, so I came and started doing the grind, and without you convincing Christian, who didn't know me
Right.
to be able to, for all of us to cram into, and let's be clear, two bedroom place, or I lived in the living room and I lived in that living room for 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, we lived in a place that's about
And not as a complaint.
No.
It was amazing.
It was not. It's not very big.
No.
If you took this space that we're in right now,
Yeah.
stretched it out to the next room,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit further down,
Yeah.
that was the entire
Yeah.
apartment.
You lived in a closet, essentially, an
did.
oversized closet. I had the front living room, which initially was just sheets hanging from the ceiling. You
Yep,
know,
exactly.
and you asking and advocating for me, which I've always found is kind of a rare thing. You know, because I think a lot of people are just in survival mode and trying to take care of themselves. I found that, a selfless thing that was very beneficial and helpful to me that really is a linchpin to, how I was able to stick around and navigate. And you were a good mentor to me, having been there and lived in your car and found a way to live in LA and meeting people. And, and then Chris was part of that in Cody, obviously. And, like all that helped me sort of find direction and get my footing that I wouldn't have had if I just showed off on the bus on my own. So that's a big moment for me that, in and of itself is like, oh, we're getting an apartment. But what it meant to me when I kind of look back on it, reflect on it, that's a really key moment for me.
It's wild that you say that you are actually think about those things. And you had mentioned some of this last night when we were talking, because I don't think of it like that. I don't remember it like that.
Yeah.
I just remember, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, you're a brother to me.
Yeah.
I don't think about the things that I do for my brother that may stick out with him, but there are moments in our lives that do have an impact, and that on a hero's journey, like as you teach, you called me a mentor in this, and I did. I guess I did help you along, and as I was, learning to navigate that when I got there and living in my car and stuff. But I made that easier for Cody. I made that easier for Dan. I made that easier for you. Because I remember, and I said this last night, we were sitting by the pool, because this is a defining moment to me as to who you are. We were sitting by the pool, and our place, if I'm going to date ourselves, was very much like Melrose Place. It was
pool right in the center.
Pool in the center, exactly. And everything.
Interesting neighbors. All of our neighbors.
Everyone
were interesting.
still in our lives. And
many of
those
them,
a lot of them still have
with love and great.
Tony Natoli, love you, dude.
Yeah, brother, for sure.
Tony, great filmmaker. Anime
actor. Still a great actor.
Oh.
Too.
So many different TV shows and whatnot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, we're sitting there by the pool, and you don't know them yet. Not like I do at this time. And we start talking about John Hughes films and the things that Breakfast Club and Pretty in Pink and all these movies, St. Elmo's Fire, all these kinds of things that had an impact on us as kids growing up.
Yeah.
Vision Quest, these movies, and you being the one who was an actor. Cody was the one that was a singer. And I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Still a singer.
Exactly. Exactly. Cody's amazing. My brother there's not a stage big enough for him. But just one of those things where this defining moment sitting there takes me to, it was like where you are now, and that moment is exactly who you became. You became somebody who wanted to tell stories and find a way to tell stories. And you were expressing to me what these movies meant to you and why, and me as well, those kinds of things, which will lead to later on down the line when we get into this conversation, some of the stuff that's going on. So now you're in LA.
Yes.
And we talked about this last night.
Yeah.
Where it dawned on me, the more we were digging, trying to figure this out, I went, wait a minute, I did walk you into offices with me when I was the waiter in LA who went from agent to agent to agent only because I was waiting on them and they would give me an opportunity.
Sure.
And as the opportunity happened, I was like, hey, you want to go with me?
Yeah.
And I walk you in, and I'm the one going, my boy, he's the actor, not me. And we found ourselves at KSA, being represented at KSA commercially, theatrically, and through this journey. And it didn't dawn on me until last night, because again, it was just things that we do.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that was the intention to have me come along for the opportunity, but it was just as much about us being able to hang out and do stuff together. Right. It was just as much about us, me giving a ride, or, and then also with the hope that maybe this could be something.
That's what I mean.
But it was all part of just living and doing
exactly.
stuff.
This is what we do together.
And then also, us trying to take advantage of these opportunities that are availing themselves. And, as we're still trying to, understand the world and that we're in,
Figuring
trying
it
to-
out.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Because we had a roommate
There's
who
no
worked his
internet.
ass off.
Yeah.
He worked as an
yeah,
actor. He worked his
absolutely.
butt off, but
Yeah.
he couldn't. I don't think he ever had an agent his entire life. You show up within months.
Yeah.
you have an agent.
Yeah.
We're grinding it out.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who did everything. I already say his name.
Yeah.
But
Well, no, I mean, but that's part of it too, because, and with him in particular, there's one thing that was a good lesson of that was he was so active about the pursuit of it. It wasn't simply about him trying to be a good actor, which wasn't the problem, is that he was always like a step ahead, ambitious on backstage or drama log, looking at,
always submitting
getting
himself.
stuff out
Yep.
there. He was always anticipating stuff. He was active about doing it. And so that was something that was a good lesson to watch and see that kind of approach to it, because you don't always know. There's sort of a fallacy that if you want it bad enough, it'll come to you. And that's bull. It doesn't work like that. That's
Right.
a wish.
Yeah.
And a wish is not an active thing. That's just a feeling. And we've gotten sort of, we seem to be part of too often people, especially people who go to Hollywood, whether it be writers, musicians, or actors, or filmmakers, or the rest, they get wrapped up into, but I really, really want it. And I'm like, cool, that's a great starting place. Now, what are you doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of those guys who was actively, within whatever was within his power, he was trying to go for it.
Right.
And he was pretty all in on it. And it was, so we definitely got to live with that and watch him, approach it that way.
Somebody who worked really hard.
Yeah.
So I remember at this point, it just dawned on me.
Sure.
Because you were there like 5 years, and then all of a sudden you look at me and said, I still have eligibility in throwing.
There's a lot more that happened in between there too, because, part of the transition was that, I booked some stuff. And in fact, the last thing I booked was, and you've talked about this, part of being able to take control of things is that it's so funny to say this, owning a mirror, this is funny to say, is that I booked a big and tall modeling thing. And so I'm out at Marina Del Rey making more money than I'd ever made,
Right.
And I'm standing next to this lovely girl, and they're, the photographer's there, and, and I'm like a dummy. I don't know what I'm talking about. And I went, oh man, because they're trying to figure out the shot. And I'm like, oh, if you over here, you can get us, and then you can get those sailboats. And he looks at me dead in the eye and goes, can we get makeup over here? And he walked away with the group, and I'm just standing there looking like a dip. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. And in conjunction with taking the acting classes, which
Right.
I also got in with Michael back in the day. And, one of my greatest frustrations that was a part of me choosing to go a different direction was that each new generation of pretty boy shows up, and Michael was like, Scott, why don't you do Mice and Men with him? And I was like, man, I've done the same. Like, I'm getting typecast in an acting class.
Hey, right.
And I got to pet the rabbits. And I like,
Right.
And so I started, and that was where I started writing. And so I wrote the monologues, and I started working on a stage play. And then, it's LA. So I'm like, oh man, I should make a movie, and I started making those short
That's right.
films. Yeah. And, and then, got into some small festivals, made some awful first films that I was super proud of at the time, but there's levels to this.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
of course, and I learned a ton from those, and, and I took advantage of the resources available to me and actors. In fact, I worked in a group home, and I actually cast them in like one of my first shorts.
that.
And I was pretty
Yeah.
proud. I got pretty good performances from them, and Latham came along and did sound, and and it I learned a lot from that, even as like embarrassing as it is now to look at it as work. But that was where I sort of shifted from wanting to be an actor to being, ooh, I like this behind the camera. I like the storytelling. I like the control of sort of, not just dealing with my own performance, but be able to manage and direct other performances, and then the totality of the story that you get to tell. And, something I was just talking about earlier is that, I like to be on set where you're around people that are enthusiastic and good energy, and, they're doing the hard work, but they're part of their collaboration, and
Right.
all
Everybody's
that
doing their
became
part.
very, yeah. And so, that sort of left me in a tenuous place. But I'd always had this, and it was a very internal thing. I didn't talk about it a lot, but I always had this like black cloud, like the I don't remember, pig pen from the Peanuts.
Yes.
Like that black cloud that just hung over my head that always made me feel bad that I didn't finish college because I dropped out. I was a terrible student and I did poorly. And so, and you're right, it was absolutely on a whim. I went, I wonder if I could go back to college.
Yeah. I remember
and
the
it was
day.
more than 5 years. It was substantially longer, which puts me in like what I'm sort of proud of is that because the longer you're out of college after you've dropped out, the less likely it is you go. So I was in this weird like 89 percentile that wouldn't go back to college,
Right.
And it was also really important to me that I went back to Southern Oregon, which is where I screwed up. Yeah. I don't know why I became so
Ashland.
fixated on
I know.
Ashland,
yeah.
But I became so fixated on the idea of I have to do it there. I have to be there. I have to go make up for my mistake at the place that I screwed up. I really don't know what that was or why. But, and then within a few months, I had my little red Geo Metro we were talking about last night, towing behind a U-Haul, and I'm going to Ashland. I'm giving up my entire life that I built almost over a decade at that point in LA to move to Southern Oregon to go finish my bachelor's degree, and that was a big thing for me because, as I've mentioned, not a good student. High school I did okay, in terms of like with attention deficit that they didn't talk about when we were kids and all the rest of it. I wasn't a great student, but I could go take the test and I'd pass my class, that kind of thing. There was always that hand slap of, you're going to fail unless you get an A on the final, and be like, oh, the final? Okay. And I'd do it and I'd be fine, and I'd passed, right? Still not a good student, not the right discipline, not the right approach. Bad student in college the first run. So I really had anxiety about going back. I was afraid I was going to fail at it. But as it turns out, after you've had to pay your bills, live, survive, whether it's waiting tables or working 50 hours a week at a group home or whatever it is, it turns out going to college wasn't as hard.
Right.
Because I thought it was hilarious that they're like, okay, you have to be there Tuesday from 12 to 2. And I'm like, that's my commitment, the 2 hours? Yeah, I think I can do that. That's it, really?
This podcast is almost 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, just read the syllabus. Oh, I did that. Read the chapters. Oh, okay. So that's all I have to do. Oh, wait. And it turned out college wasn't that hard, know? And that's one of my big points of pride for me in my own personal story is that I went back to Southern Oregon with the GPA that they didn't forgive. It was 2.1. Right. So that not good. Let's just say, for anybody who's not familiar, 2.1 is not a good GPA. All right. That's less than a C. And I was still, now it's 12 years later, 10 years later, I'm still on academic probation. They hadn't forgiven me on that.
Oh.
And then they also wouldn't let my GPA go. So with that GPA, I was focused and I'm like, I'm going to get my degree. But now I was an active student. I was now the guy sitting in the front of the room who, when the professor says in the astronomy class, anybody have any other questions? I was the guy going, yeah, I do. And you'd hear 200 people go, oh, and I'm like, look, man, I'm invested. I want to know what's going on. I was actually curious and sort of surmise this ramble is that, the thing I'm particularly proud of is getting the degree, which made me feel good, had a wonderful experience. And to be honest with you, I had way more fun this time going to college, and I worked. I was back on the track team, which you mentioned. I went back to nationals and competed. I'm old at this point relative.
Right.
I'm throwing it at nationals and I got like 10th again, so not great, no coach, a guy who's technically I could have been master's class at this point, and so the nice thing about a small college thing and then, but more importantly to all of that is that I raised my GPA from a 2.21 to on the last term of the final bit of college before I graduated, I raised my GPA to a 3.52. I'm so proud of that because that meant that I graduated with honors. I went from being a guy who's going drinking beer on a Friday and forgetting to go to class for a week to being the guy who's gotten straight A's. The funniest moment for me was when on that first semester, in the middle of the semester, I remember, if you remember this, where like if you're doing poorly in the middle of the semester, midterms, you got to go around and get the teachers to sign to say that you're still doing okay. And I had teachers going, what the fuck is this? Because I was such a good student at that point that they were confused by it. And I'm like, well, kind of the holdover from before, you know?
Oh, wow.
So they were baffled that the idea had to do that. And so for me, that was a big, cloud that got put away, a success, and part of the success was knowing how to do the work, knowing how to approach it, have the right attitude about it, not get distracted by all the things that frankly pulled me in when I was a kid.
Right.
Now I was there, because there's an old adage that, education is wasted on the youth. And, and for me, that was 100% true.
Right.
So when I went, I was, oh man, it was a wonderful experience, absolutely worth, the time and the sacrifice of doing it. And, and it was just one of those other random turning points in my life, certainly have not done things in any kind of normal way, but that again, that was part of moving to LA and part of all of our friendship.
Right.
It wasn't about
building on it.
Yeah. It was, we've all had our own paths, even though we've always been connected. We've all still done our own things,
right.
And still had those relationships. And so that was part of the thing for me that was really important that I needed to do for myself was to go finish that degree.
So that brought you back though. You came back to LA and
first I moved back home, which is something we've always said, I'm never going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm never going to live in Salem. But I did, and then I applied to Chapman University, which at the time was just coming in as one of the best film schools. They just built, $45 million studio stages. They started bringing in these professors from AFI and some of the best film schools to be part of this school. And so I took that transition year between undergrad planning to go to film school, which was one of the top film schools. And I was very clear about where I wanted to go. And I applied, and it's, I don't know, for people who haven't applied to graduate school, you have to write a paper about a movie that you like. So you have to write an essay about that. You have to write.
What was your movie?
I wrote about Boogie Nights.
Oh, shoot.
Right? And because, listen, I one of the things I really appreciate about that movie, it's an ensemble piece and it has a great narrative to it. And Mark Wahlberg is a clear protagonist in this story, but all the supporting stories as part of the ensemble, they all had very rich, clear stories as well.
Yeah, that's
clear,
what I liked
strong
about it
motivations
too.
About it.
Right.
And in fact, the porn industry had its own character arc as well.
Right.
The porn industry went from, as they described in the movie, going from movie houses shot on film and, a level of filmmaking to it to where it was just video and straight distribution through VHS.
Right.
And it was related to the rest of the story and the rest of the characters in it. So it was interesting to me. And plus, I just didn't want to do the obvious, which frankly, I think one of the best movies ever made was The Godfather. And that's the one I wanted to write about. But it felt like obvious. Everyone's
going to do that.
And nobody wrote about The Godfather.
Are you serious?
Nobody ever does it because it seems obvious if people try to be interesting or different or whatever. And now I'm unabashedly like The Godfather is one of the best, because it works on so many different levels. But so, the Chapman thing, and then, I'm in the midst of it. I, had an interview, and then somewhere in the middle of that, and here's how it was explained to me: we lost your application. And I was like,
what?
Jiggle what? And I really, and what do you do? How do you confront somebody that I'm trying to get into the school, and they're just like, sorry, maybe you can think about reapplying. And I'm like, man, what am I going to do? And so I'm staying, and funny enough, living back in Salem gave me the motivation.
Yeah.
So
there's nothing wrong with Salem. It was a great place to grow up for us.
No.
It's not where it wasn't. No, but it's not where I wanted to stay.
At this point, I'm talking about for me where I was at and what I wanted to do.
Right.
It's home. It's always home.
Right.
You go home, it's home. Right. And there are plenty of people we know that, got married, had kids, and did that stuff.
You're living a good life.
Yeah. It's
great life. Yeah.
But I had to, not just do stuff because other people did it, or because here's what I saw on TV that you're supposed to do. Go to high school, go to college, get married, have kids.
Right.
Work, retire, die. That's. That
that's a sad movie.
Well, and not to over not to over consolidate it, but that was part of what I looked at. And so I reapplied to Chapman, but this time I also applied to smaller film schools as fallbacks just in case, because Chapman was, 600 people applied for 15 spots at Chapman for a directing track. In 60, so there's only 15 spots. So the idea so it's a long shot to get into exactly the school I want to go to. I was very clear about where I wanted to go. I looked at the program, I looked at people who were teaching there, I knew where I wanted to be. And I didn't get into one of the schools that were backup schools that I wanted to get into, but I got into Chapman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So for me, that was, and
I didn't know the story behind it.
Yeah.
I'm just
no. But he's
going to Chapman.
Yeah,
cool.
This is just my own personal experience with it. Not everybody had the same kind of experience, and I was a bit older when I went as well. And ton of money. Student loans are crazy, but I knew what I wanted to do, and I was like, damn the torpedoes, I'm going there. And at this point, I was going because I wanted to go learn this craft. I've been making movies, and I thought I was pretty good at it, and I was doing okay. I'd won a few little awards at festivals. I've been able to make some stuff, and I still enjoyed it. And, but it's also, you don't know what you don't know. Right. So I want to go, and I'm going to graduate school so that I can, get the voices in my head and to learn from people who are substantially better than I am. And again, just to clarify, and here's the misnomer about, I'll just put it in the context of film schools, is it's not necessarily about the people who've made stuff or done really well at things, because there's a completely different craft to being a teacher, and you not only do they have to have mastery of the art form, but then they also have to have mastery of teaching to be able to get you to do it.
Exactly.
Because if you know how to do it, but you can't get your students to be able to do it, then you're of no value.
Right.
As a teacher in particular. Right. So Chapman was a great opportunity for me to go in, and it was super challenging. It was really, as we talked about last night, many occasions about it was awful. It was isolating, and it was hard to do. Getting my thesis was challenging, but I had the maturity at the time to recognize and finish the thought is that I'm in the middle of character building. This sucks, but I know how I choose to manage this in this moment will be the thing that makes me more prepared for the next hard moment to come, and it will come.
And we're going to leave that on this particular episode, because that's in movie making, TV, this is the turn to commercial, or tune in next week to find out what happens.
Same bad channel.
Exactly. So real quick, we're going to be back next week. We're going to finish this. We're going to finish, because we talked about this last night, what you had to go through at Chapman and why. I have Scott Hartmann, my childhood friend. He teaches at the New York Film Academy. So if you're into making movies, telling stories, wanting to get into anything like this, we're going to dive deeper into how you became the guy that you are in this second episode. Nice. Real shout out again to JPS Computers, Rock Rage Radio, everybody out there listening. I want to say thank you so much. And SMP Inc. We'll be back next week. I got Scott Hartmann,
buddy.
Professor, teacher, my buddy, my childhood friend, family, next week on a Hero's Journey podcast.
Dream, and I believe it's coming around to me.